if Russia stops fighting tomorrow, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting tomorrow, Ukraine ends.
Are you concerned about the growing influence of political extremism, hyperpolarization, and misinformation? Well, you're not alone. This is the American Values Coalition podcast, where we explore the root causes of these societal ills and provide you with strategies to counter them. Welcome, AVC listeners. Today we are going to be talking about foreign policy, international relations, lots to talk about, lots happening this month in January 2026. We are recording this on January 23rd, 2026. I just want to make sure to say that because it seems like every weekend something crazy is happening in January. And I don't want you to be like, well, why aren't they talking about that crazy thing that happened on Sunday? Well, for us, it hasn't happened yet. So my guest to help me sort of process a lot of what's taking place, an expert in these areas, is Luke Coffey. He's a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, where he analyzes national security and foreign policy with a focus on Europe, Eurasia, NATO, and transatlantic relations. Luke Coffey, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. And just think, we have 11 and a half months left of the year to experience all the chaos.
The rest could be boring. I don't know.
I doubt that.
Yeah. All right. So, World Economic Forum is happening this week. The European Union seems like more united than I've seen it in my lifetime. It's just kind of crazy that they're united against America, against us. So that's kind of new. So let's take the big picture. What do you see taking place today with the European Union and all these sort of renegotiating, reorganizing of alliances and that sort of stuff?
Well, during President Trump's first administration, he had a very fraught relationship with many of his European counterparts. But the paradox was a lot of the policies that came out of the first Trump administration were actually quite good when it came to transatlantic security and NATO. Perhaps it wasn't communicated very well, but the policy that was happening, behind the scenes was quite good. This time around, you had European leaders seemingly learning from their first time on how to deal with Trump, and things seemed to be going well again at first. Like the relationship seemed a lot better until Greenland got on the scene, and I think this became a red line for many European leaders. For those who aren't familiar with the situation, Greenland, the world's largest island, high up in the Arctic. At least as a kid growing up in geography, I was taught it was in North America, but certainly culturally, economically, historically, it's very much European. It's a part of the Kingdom of Denmark in the same way that Puerto Rico or Guam is part of the United States. And President Trump became very vocal recently on America's need to acquire, to get Greenland one way or the other, the hard way or the easy way, he would say. And this all came to a head in Davos, which, long story short, saw President Trump backtrack on some of his more forceful rhetoric about Greenland. And this subsequently avoided a larger trade war that we were about to have with Europe.
And so did Trump blink? Is that so? He said he would not use military force to invade Greenland.
Yeah. Well,
all right. So
I know.
At least there's that.
Yeah. The bar is very low, I guess, in terms of how we measure success in these things. Yes. So the United States has formally declared that we will not use military force to invade and annex part of a fellow NATO member. President Trump seems to have found his own off-ramp on this matter in his mind, where he's going around and the White House is going around telling everyone that there's going to be this great new deal. We have a framework of a deal which will give us total access, President Trump said, new military bases, more mining opportunities for minerals. But the reality is we already have this stuff. Anyone can Google the 1951 treaty we have with Denmark that sets out the terms of our engagement with Greenland. Anything we want to do with Greenland, we can already. We could mine there a lot, but we don't because it's not profitable, at least right now, under existing technologies. We could have more military troops there if we wanted, but we don't. We could have greater economic connectivity there, but we don't because, again, it comes down to profitability. Just last summer, for the first time in decades, there was a direct flight from the United States to Greenland. It's a seasonal flight out of Newark, only in the summer. So this just goes to show it's not because we can't have this close connection with Greenland. It's because the private sector has determined it's not profitable. But one thing President Trump did very well was to highlight the importance of Greenland. And no one disputes this. Greenland is important. But I think there are ways we can achieve our objectives in Greenland without invading.
Yeah, and I just want to remind folks, he never talked about this during the campaign. It was only after he won the election, then he started talking about we need Greenland. This wasn't a campaign promise he needs to fulfill or anything like that. This isn't why voters selected him. And it's been strange to watch this like right-wing media, commentators on like Fox News and so forth, all of a sudden, picking up like, oh yeah, we need Greenland. Like this is not something that's ever been part of their career, positions before. And he's making the national security argument. You're saying, yes, it is important for national security, but we don't have to actually own Greenland. We already have that. Right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. A very interesting observation for me throughout the past couple of weeks over Greenland was how many smart people were willing to go on live television, twist themselves into knots, performing these intellectual gymnastics on why an American acquisition of Greenland is good and why it's best for NATO and why it's not like what Russia's doing with Ukraine and Crimea, and saying that we absolutely need this for our security. For President Trump to then just at a drop of a hat say, oh, we got a great deal, we have a framework of a deal, it's a long-term deal, it has nothing to do with the U.S. acquiring or annexing Greenland. And, not only was it not mentioned during the campaign, the Trump administration published its national security strategy the first week of December. I mean, it's dated November, but it was only published the first week of December. 30-something pages. I don't know, I think it was like 33 pages or something like this. The word Arctic is not mentioned once in this document. The word Greenland's nowhere to be found. So yeah, I agree. I find it hard as a policy expert, as someone who focuses on these issues. I've been to Greenland. I've testified before Congress on Arctic security issues. I've written a lot on this subject. I like to focus on Greenland because it is important, and Denmark is a fantastic ally for the United States. But I was puzzled by this urgency, this newfound urgency to acquire it, to buy it, to annex it, to not rule out military intervention. And if I'm puzzled by this, I'm from rural Missouri, and my family back at home, they have no idea why we need Greenland. People are still worried about the price of groceries, access to affordable health care, good education for their children. buying Greenland for, I think one figure that was thrown around was $700 billion, doesn't really feel like the fiscal conservatism that many American conservatives are looking for.
All right. So let's go back to Europe for a second, and then I want to come back to the
Yeah.
Western Hemisphere issues. What is the state of NATO today in 2026, and where do you see its future at this point?
Yeah, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has been the primary security guarantor of North America and Europe since 1949. During the Cold War, the mission was clear: stop, deter, and if necessary, defeat the Soviet Union on the battlefield. After the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended, there were people wondering, what's the point of NATO? Then 9/11 happened, and that kind of refocused attention on the need for having allies and partners. And tens of thousands of European troops served very bravely in Afghanistan, suffering on a per capita basis just as many, if not more, casualties. Denmark, for example, tiny Denmark, they suffered more casualties per capita than we did, than the United States, and they fought in some of the most dangerous places in the country. But 9/11 kind of refocused the alliance, and then when Obama lost interest in Afghanistan in 2010, 2011, and announced that NATO would end its combat-led mission in 2014, there were more questions. But then the annexation of Crimea happened. Crimea is a peninsula that's part of Ukraine. It's indisputable it's part of Ukraine. The international community recognizes it as being part of Ukraine. Russia, before it invaded, recognized Crimea as being part of Ukraine. And when Russia invaded Crimea, this was a wake-up call for NATO. And from 2014 to now, NATO has increased its defense spending year on year. It's positioned more troops and capabilities in Central and Eastern Europe to deter not Soviet aggression, but Russian aggression. And, President Trump has played an important role in this, right? I mean, he has said things publicly that other U.S. presidents were thinking privately or would say privately, right? Without a doubt, President Trump has encouraged the increase in defense spending. But there's only one person that's mainly responsible for the increase in European defense spending, and that is Vladimir Putin, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people nowadays who want NATO to do things it was never designed to do. It needs to be a counterterrorism force. It needs to focus on China. It doesn't need to do any of this stuff. Maybe the members of NATO need to do this, worry about China, worry about counterterrorism. But NATO as an institution needs to be ready to deter aggression in the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer. And those aren't my words. Those are the words from the 1949 treaty. So NATO, in many ways, NATO's future is its past. It doesn't have to be everywhere in the world doing everything, but it does have to be in the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer, able to defend the territory of its member states. NATO is in a much better position now than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, undoubtedly. A lot of that is because, Russia served as a wake-up call. And also a lot of the behavior from the first Trump administration and now the second Trump administration has also served as a wake-up call. Europeans want to try to become more independent or less dependent on the United States. But ultimately, NATO serves America's interests because NATO serves as the primary security guarantor of our largest export market. 46 out of 50 states export more to Europe than they do to China. And when an American is building a product to be exported, that's a job. And right now, Vladimir Putin is trying to undermine the stability and security in Europe that has led to the economic prosperity across that continent, which not only benefits the US economy, but ultimately the American worker. So, this is why I think NATO is relevant today. It ensures that our largest export market and our largest source of foreign direct investment into the United States, which is Europe, by a lot, remains secure.
But isn't it? I mean, isn't it also about sharing uh, protection of democracies? Like democracies saying we're going to protect each other from, Putin or whatever other threat there is.
Yeah, certainly so. Europe matters for many reasons. I gave the economic reasons, but Europe also matters because there's nowhere in the world that we share the same ideas and values than we do with many of our European partners. Many of the ideas that our nation is founded on were brought over from Europe. Our oldest and closest allies are in Europe. But the reality is, for whatever reason, I mean, we could probably have a whole podcast on this subject, but for whatever reason, these normative arguments or these values based arguments, they don't work anymore for most of the American public. I think it's a consequence of our contentious political environment we have at home. But if you tell, someone in middle America that NATO is important because of a shared value in democracy and freedom and human rights, they'll kind of like nod their head politely and then just, lose interest. But if you tell them that where they work and the product they make is more likely to be exported to Europe than to any other place around the world, then that interests them because that can impact the bank account.
Yeah.
So certainly NATO does matter because it does keep this coalition of like-minded countries together. I think that's important. A lot of people think this is important, but I find that it's not the best way to communicate why NATO is important to people today.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think you're right. I mean, I've heard this other places that these days for folks on the right, if you just talk about being pro democracy, that's like lefty coded for some reason. It's just a weird place we're in these days.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it doesn't take long, and then you're using center left wing talking points from the 1970s. But that's where we are.
Yeah. What about Ukraine in particular? Does does it matter for U.S. interest whether Ukraine falls to Russia or is able to join NATO?
Well, it certainly matters. For the going back to the economic reason, economic stability in Europe benefits us economically. But more than that, Russia is our geopolitical adversary. There may be people who are in denial about this, but the Kremlin considers us to be their adversary. They see themselves as being in some state of war with the United States and the West. It's on a spectrum. It's not, shooting war right now, but they certainly see us in some sort of conflict. And right now we have a country that has been invaded by Russia that wants to defend itself. They're not asking for US troops. They just want the means, the ability to defend themselves against an outside invader. Maybe I grew up watching Red Dawn too many times. The original one, not the newer version that came out about 10 years ago, I think. I believe, call me old fashioned, but I believe in the notion of self-defense. And there are some on the right and also on the left. Again, this is another issue where like the left and the right can sort of meet. They say, well, America shouldn't fund this proxy war against Russia, and this is none of our business. It's not a proxy war. I mean, the definition of a proxy war is one country fighting a war at the insistence of a bigger country. We're not forcing Ukraine to fight. They're fighting for their survival. And I think this is a noble cause. I've been to Ukraine many times, but since the war started, and the large scale war in 2022, I've been there 5 or 6 times, and the resiliency of the population and the courage, it really hits you. And to think that we wouldn't provide them with the weapons needed just to defend themselves, I think frankly, it's shameful. But then there's a broader geopolitical issue here as well. There are some people who say, well, we need to worry about what China's doing in Asia, and this is the big threat for America, and, Taiwan, the security of Taiwan. Well, the best way one of the ways to help secure Taiwan and defend Taiwan is to make Russia lose or have big problems in Ukraine. Because Russia and China are partners on the global stage. Perhaps Russia is the junior partner, but they're still partners. And China is watching how we respond to Ukraine because Beijing has its eye on Taiwan. So a more secure Ukraine equals a safer Taiwan, in my opinion. The security of East Asia and Eastern Europe cannot be separated. They're interconnected. And made most evident by the fact that, more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been used to fight against Ukrainians on the front lines at the behest of Russia. So Ukraine does matter. We can do more. We've essentially stopped providing any financial aid or assistance. People say it's too expensive. Americans can't afford it. We have too much debt. This is nonsense. If you look at the amount of money that has been authorized by Congress for Ukraine since February 2022, it's about $180 billion, give or take, about $180 billion. Okay? America's GDP, if America's GDP since February of 2022 was represented by a $1 bill, the amount of money we've given to Ukraine over the same period of time would be represented like this. You take 100 pennies from that dollar bill, take one penny, cut that penny into 10 pieces, and then take one of those pieces, and that would be what we provided to Ukraine since February 2022. We can easily do this if we want to, if we choose to. But right now, for whatever reason, we've chosen not to.
Yeah, and it's my understanding a lot of this aid isn't, we're not talking about just giving them cash. It's just weapons that would have been retired anyway, right?
Yeah, this isn't pallets of cash like we saw with President Obama and the Iranians. Most of this money, about 85% of this money never leaves the United States. So here's how it works. We give Ukraine stockpiles that we have, and then we buy new stuff to replace our shelves. So not only do we get to help our partner weaken one of our top geopolitical adversaries without a single American pulling a trigger or getting shot at, we actually resupply ourselves with newer and more advanced equipment. And then we get to see how our equipment actually functions, how it performs in a real wartime environment, something that's impossible to replicate through simulations and training. And then we can modify our equipment to make it even better. Again, all without a single American pulling a trigger or getting shot at. And then you have some who say, well, you know what? We're forcing the Ukrainians to fight. We are not forcing them to fight. They have no choice but to fight for their homeland. I always say if Russia stops fighting tomorrow, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting tomorrow, Ukraine ends. And this is the situation when you boil it down. This is a country fighting for its existence. Something that we in America haven't had to do, and God willing, we'll never have to do.
All right, so let's kind of tie. So let's go back to the Western Hemisphere and kind of tie some of these together. So I'm going to play devil advocate for a second. So,
Okay.
yeah, but Ukraine, it's like way over there, right? And that's Europe. That's Europe's problems. Europe can deal with Europe's problems. We should focus on the Western Hemisphere. We going back to like the Monroe Doctrine. So we are going to run Venezuela, in the words of Donald Trump. We, take control of Greenland. Maybe we're going to invade Cuba at some point, take the Panama Canal. But this is all proximity
Don't
stuff.
forget Canada.
Oh yeah, Canada is going to be the
Yeah.
51st state, unless Greenland's the 51st, and they're going to be the 52nd. So yeah, but this is all proximity. They're in our backyard. They're over here. They're over there. So we need to focus on what we're doing over here in this area of the globe.
When I hear this, you've heard this a lot recently, especially about Greenland. Greenland is in our backyard. Greenland, we need Greenland for national security. The people of Greenland aren't happy with how they're governed. We need Greenland for minerals and resources. These are the same arguments that you hear from the Kremlin about Crimea. I mean, you can take the word Greenland out and put Crimea, and this is what you hear on Russian state television about their justification for entering Ukraine. America is a global power, whether we like it or not. We have global interests. And the Western Hemisphere is important, undoubtedly. And I liked what happened with Maduro. Here's the problem that you often get with the Trump administration. We go in this very audacious, courageous raid and capture this narco terrorist, bring him back, enters the U.S. justice system, and he's taken off the scene, right? 2 days later, the U.S., in coordination with our allies and partners in the United Kingdom, board a part of the Russian oil tanker Ghost Fleet and commandeer that tanker. And you're like, wow, things are, it's looking good. And then you have, the White House now ruling out the use of force on Greenland. And it seems like that trajectory, that positive trajectory it just disappears. The trajectory changes. And, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But, yes, Cuba's in the Western Hemisphere, Venezuela, Panama Canal, Greenland. We have to find ways, we have to have the sophistication and the statecraft to find ways to meet America's objectives in different ways. The solution can't always be, well, we're going to, invade and annex, or we're going to, and certainly with Venezuela, this hasn't been the case. We're told that we're running the country now. I don't really know what that means. It wasn't regime change, it was a leadership change, because it seems like the regime is still there.
Mm-hmm.
The number 2 is now the number 1, who is just as illegitimate as Maduro was. The full national security apparatus remains fully intact in Venezuela. I'm not sure what's going on there. But I go back to my point about the importance of Europe. Yeah, it may be part of the way around the world. Maybe Ukraine is, thousands of miles away. But Europe is our largest export market. Europe is our largest source of foreign investment into America. That creates millions of jobs. If we're not involved there, then history tells us what happens, whether we like it or not. We were there in World War, we got involved in World War I, despite strong resistance at home. We got involved in World War II, again, in the lead up to World War II, with a lot of resistance from getting involved in either theater of conflict in Europe or Asia. History tells us that if we're not involved and engaged in Europe now, then the American family will once again have to sacrifice greatly, because it's just too important. We can't pretend like we're not interconnected, or we're intertwined. We are. And there's no escaping that. It'll be far easier to deter Russian aggression and to defend the Baltic states, for example, than it will be to liberate them.
Oh, yeah.
So we should be thinking like this as we develop our foreign policy. It's not either Asia or Europe. It's not, we can ignore the Middle East now. This isn't how it works. I wish it was, but it's not how reality is. And it's geopolitical negligence to think that we can just focus on the Western Hemisphere.
So,
And one more point
yeah,
on the Monroe Doctrine. I mean, the irony
yeah.
here is that if it wasn't for the support of our closest ally, the United Kingdom, in this case, the Royal Navy, we couldn't have implemented the Monroe Doctrine, as certainly in the first few decades after it was established. So we were dependent on our allies and partners then to enforce our own doctrine in the Western Hemisphere. There's a
Yeah.
lesson to be had there.
It's a doctrine that seems like it's been kind of flexible over the years, right?
Yeah, I mean, the original Monroe, this is perhaps recently the most quoted but least read mantra or doctrine, out there right now. The Monroe Doctrine was essentially saying no new European colonies in the New World. Existing colonies, fine. No new ones coming in. This is the area that we're going to focus on now. And, we barely had a Navy at the time in the 1820s, and it was the Royal Navy that enforced it for us.
All right. So for your last question, this may be difficult to answer, but tell me something you're most hopeful about for 2026.
Um, I am cautiously optimistic that there will be some deal between Russia and Ukraine. I believe that the Russians are really feeling the pressure, especially on the front lines. Economically, they're feeling it. What this deal will look like, I don't know, but I know there's been a lot of human suffering. And it's quite clear that President Zelensky is the enabler of peace. He goes along with everything President Trump suggests. And Vladimir Putin is the obstacle. And I think many Ukrainians have, the society is exhausted. It's rough. It's hard. Right now in the high temperatures in the teens, electricity blackouts, heating is not working. People are cold. Russia's ramped up its missile attacks and drone attacks because they can't make much progress on the front lines. What the Ukrainians are asking for is a just peace and not a surrender. They want an honorable peace. And, they're quite happy to take a punt on President Trump on this issue because, with President Biden, they were getting just enough to survive, but never enough to actually win or be decisive on the battlefield. And he can only do that for so long, So they see, since it seems unlikely that they will get the resources they need to actually win militarily, they are willing to accept a just peace, honorable peace to bring this war to an end. That being said, I do believe that whatever outcome there will be in terms of a ceasefire, it will be temporary. Russia will be back. It may be 5 years, it may be 10 years, but it will be back. History tells us this, and there's no reason to assume otherwise.
All right. Luke Coffey, thank you for joining the AVC podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.